Kaina knew people, women in particular, wore clothes for a reason. The reason was to hide all those ugly folds of skin and all that wild-looking pubic hair. Women were pretty where it was legal to show them: buttocks, upper arms, breasts, and yes, of course, those long, smooth legs. These were the parts of a woman that should be admired. But the rest of a woman was just so much biology as far as Kaina was concerned. To Kaina, a woman's sex organs looked like a surgical wound that would never heal. It attracted her about as much as a wound would attract her. Only a sick man like Jack the Ripper would groove on seeing such wounds. Ugh, maybe the captor had a secret liking for dead bodies as well, but he did not keep them in his freezer, thank God. Kaina knew that the privates of a woman could do things to a man, that they had a certain power over him, and it frightened her because she knew that women had no way to control that power. Witness Brandy Manson. Oh, yes. What would little Miss Manson give to be free of that captor's lust? What would she do just to reverse that centerfold and not have ever posed for it? Kaina figured that Brandy would do just about anything. It wasn't natural, Kaina knew, to be so spellbound over a photograph like a man could get. A man could get positively nuts over a nude shot of a woman. It was a subtle form of hypnotism to be sexually charged over a picture. Men did things to themselves while they looked at these pictures. Kaina had been told this, and Kaina couldn't understand how men could psych themselves into believing that the woman in the centerfold wanted them. Why would a woman want him just because she had posed for that particular scene? But men somehow could suspend disbelief easily enough. Besides, maybe it didn't matter if the woman wanted the man or not. Maybe it was just the male who needed attracting, and to hell with what the woman in the photo wanted. Maybe that was what guys were thinking when they stared and lusted. Kaina also believed that women who posed for these things were a little bit crazy. But right now she didn't want to think about that. She was about to serve a tray of breakfast to a porno star, and if she didn't do it soon, she would lose her nerve. She didn't need any more negatives right now, to be damn sure. What a perverted Norman Rockwell painting the scene Kaina had found last evening could have been. Upon entering Brandy's room, Kaina had taken a good look at the scene, just for an instant. As Kaina finished her meal, she saw Brandy once again as she had been last night, wrapped in an Indian blanket, stripped naked, sitting by the fire. Above her was a barred window, barred from the inside, and over the bed had been that evil poster. The scene was quite obvious. The woman was a captive, and she was shivering by the fireplace. The poster was obviously the same girl, and there could be no doubt of that. It pretty much said it all. Captive Centerfold. That would have made an excellent title for that Norman Rockwell scene. Kaina swallowed and stood up, taking her plate into the kitchen to rinse it off. Fortunately, Rockwell would never get to paint that one. Kaina prepared Brandy's tray, feeling the excitement rise within herself. Kaina smacked her lips together, greasing them with the bacon grease, and she licked them, tasting once again that bacon taste she loved so much. She licked her fingers, and she started building Brandy's tray up with small dishes of butter and jelly and toast. She covered her large plate of eggs and bacon with a napkin to keep the heat in, and she poured Brandy a cup of coffee, adding a bit of cream for good measure. All women drink cream in their coffee, thought Kaina, even porno stars. Outside the window, the day was sunny bright now and painful to her eyes. It reflected off the snow brightly. The sky was a painful blue and beautiful, like a ski scene at Aspen in a magazine. She could imagine a lot of skiers in wrap-around reflector shades, smiling and wincing at the world around them. Her spirits lifted a little bit with the thoughts of this. It made the inside of this house seem awfully dark by comparison. Caiina had delayed this meeting with Brandy now as long as she could. A tray of breakfast might make Brandy more sociable, and it might not, but Caiina felt like they must meet now. It must be this breakfast and this morning for both of them, if such a thing as an alliance was to be formed. If Brandy was not going to help Caiina, then Caiina knew that she was now physically strong enough to force Brandy to remain in that room. Caiina would then become the captor herself for both of their own good. This thought aided her deeply. Surely that wouldn't happen, she told herself. The things the captor had used against Brandy were heinous. Nudity, captivity, shame, and isolation had all been used artfully to make Brandy as hollow-eyed and as degraded as she could be. Caiina would have to try and top these things if she was to bring Brandy back around again. Caiina would have to come up with tools better than the ones he had used in order to bring her out of this spell, whatever that spell might happen to be. Caiina now compared the captor to Don. All of these Oregonians were alike, she nodded. Don and this captor fellow had an awful lot in common. Both of them had dragged their choice of woman out to this frozen hell on earth, and both of them had basically said, "Live here with me in these less than tolerable conditions." At least, that was how Caiina saw it. Don and this man she had called the captor didn't give a damn for the women they had abducted, and they didn't have any compassion for the needs of their women. Don and the captor were selfish people. Caiina hated them both equally. Maybe it was the smell of Brandy's room, that pissy smell. Maybe it was the porno star herself. Maybe it was all of that somehow. Whatever, Caiina had never hated anything as badly in her life as she did this house and these conditions. Caiina finally had to force herself to pick up Brandy's heavy tray and start towards the staircase in the front of the house. She walked slowly through the wide kitchen and into the dining room, staring down at the edge of her tray as she walked along. She saw out of her peripheral vision the stone foyer, and she knew to hang a sharp left here to begin ascending the staircase. She was balanced quite well as she started the great climb to the top. From her right she could feel the heat of her feeble fire now, and she knew that it was blazing brightly within the darkened walls of the Fisher stove. Her clothing would be drying quickly, and she gained strength from the warmth of her fire as she walked steadily upwards. She got to the top of the darkened stairwell, reasoning that the door wasn't open. It was closed and latched, and she had no free hand to reach out and open it with. Her tray was getting seriously heavy now, and her wrists began to burn with shooting heat. This heat went through her arms as she gamely tried to hold the tray level. She swallowed and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to think. She finally rested the tray against the large brass knob of the door at the top of the stairs. In a dangerous and precarious manner, and using her right hand to grip the tray, she reached under the tray with her left hand and fumbled to get a grip on the knob. Pushing her stomach then against the tray to raise the edge a little bit, she managed to grasp the knob and slowly turn it. Inside the great ponderous weight of the door, she could hear a great metal tumbler clicking, that click-clatch sound of all ancient doors. She reached up to grasp the tray with her left hand as the door moved open. The heavy door did not open too quickly, or else Brandy's breakfast would have been all over the floor in the room upstairs. Mercifully this did not come to pass, and she thanked God quietly under her breath as she leveled out her tray and started across the floor. There was a small coffee table that she wanted to set the tray upon for just a moment. She reached the coffee table and placed her tray down without incident, and then she stood up and took a breath. She turned to look at Brandy's door. It loomed at her menacingly. The fire up here had caught up as well as the one downstairs, and it was now almost hot in here. The door was latched sloppily still, with that open lock hanging loosely, yet effectively, from its hasp. Kaina walked over to the door and placed her hand against the cold lock. She held her fingers locked around it for a moment, and then she called out to the girl inside the room. "Brandy," called Kaina. No answer. "Brandy," called Kaina, louder. Still no answer. Kaina grew concerned. Was she all right? Had the effects of her exposure to that chilly room finally killed her? Oh God, what if she's dead? There was an uncertain, unearthly silence emanating out of the room. Kaina saw in her mind's eye a frozen little form crumpled by the dead cold fireplace, and a shiver passed through her. Yet, at the same time, Kaina was now seeing a vision of a crafty woman standing just behind the door inside here, holding a large blunt object over her head, and waiting for Kaina to walk inside, waiting to bash her brains out and take off running. Kaina shook her head and took a deep breath. Whatever was waiting for her in the room, it couldn't be half so bad as what Kaina was seeing in her mind at this very moment. Oh, hell with it. She reached up and she opened the hasp, removing the lock. The lock was a heavy thing in her hand now, and she reached down to turn the knob of the door. Like the one in the stairway, this doorknob had a great brass handle, and tumblers inside that click-clatched when the door was open. Kaina turned it and pushed against the door. For some reason Kaina hadn't thought of her knife until just now. It was as though she could not have ever used it against Brandy, no matter what the girl did to her. Her knife was downstairs, and Kaina was praying that he didn't pick this particular time to return and find them up here together. That same pissy smell was stronger this morning as the door fell inwards on its hinges. It creaked horribly as though it had never been oiled. She tried not to breathe the smell too deeply, and she tried not to gag either. It was a freshly made smell, and it had something mixed with it that was almost unbearable. Kaina recognized the smell from Mrs. Cherbourg's house, when she had had Tabs the cat. Kaina smelled evergreen kitty litter in this room. Kaina forced herself not to throw up in the closeness of the heavy scent. She saw Brandy's toilet facilities, from whence emanated the overpowering reek. Kaina's eyes widened in horror. It was a beige thing over by the bed. It was shaped like a Big Mac container, with an upper half and a lower half. Along the center line were the words written in red slashing letters. The words were, "Dog, go potty." If it had been on the roof of an automobile, this thing would have been mistaken for a luggage carrier. But the words on the side of it told that different story. "Dog, go potty," in scripted print. If Brandy had used the thing last night, Kaina might have noticed it then upon entering the room. The thing was of such an inconspicuous nature that only a terrible smell coming from it would get you to look at it. A smell that reminded Kaina of the pediatrics ward of a hospital she had visited once. The babies who looked so cute and cuddly from the windows were responsible for that ungodly odor that would sweep out behind a large nurse every time she opened the door to the nursery. Kaina had wondered how such sweet little things could smell so badly. Now she was thinking the same thing about Brandy, who was sitting upon the open hearth, her back to Kaina. It must be the lack of water, thought Kaina. If real toilets didn't have water in them, they'd probably all smell just like that. The "Dog, go potty" wasn't designed for Brandy Manson. It had been converted to accommodate her. There had been a door on the side of it that was now sealed over. The door, reasoned Kaina, must have been how the dog would get in and out of the thing. Funny, but Kaina had always thought that only cats used litter boxes. The plastic had covered the side of the door, was the same as the box itself. Must have been one of those pop-out doors. He had taken part of the top of the lid and cut her out a commode hole. Interesting and ingenious. Kaina was now wishing that he had made her a commode lid so that she could cover up that thing. It was really ripe in here. Above Brandy's bed, the centerfold leered down hatefully at Kaina like a wild-eyed demon, naked and full of sin. The smile painted on and grimacing this morning, as if the demonic gaze could see the scene before it and could despise Brandy's situation for her. The figure in the centerfold looked as if she too was offended by this stench. Kaina would have liked to scream right now, but she couldn't. How dare he make her use a litter box? The implication was clear. Brandy was his bitch, his dog. Kaina listened as Brandy stirred over by the hearth, and she tore her eyes away from the dog-go potty to look at Brandy. As her eyes swept over to Brandy, Kaina saw that there was more in the way of furnishings than she had remembered seeing last night. There was, beside the bed, a nightstand sort of a thing with 2 levels. These levels held basins, a lower one and an upper one. The upper one, Kaina saw, had a nice ceramic pitcher that sat beside it. The upper basin, ceramic also, was resting down inside an oval hole cut in the wood. The lower basin was missing, but its hole bore record that a similar basin should have gone there. As Kaina's eyes swept over to the hearth, she saw the lower basin where Brandy now had it using it. She was using it to brush her teeth and spitting her rinse water from a large glass down inside of the basin. Her glass sat half full of water by the basin. Along the edge of its lip was smeared from Brandy's toothpaste. In that moment, Kaina saw it all as Brandy turned to look at her. "Brandy?" asked Kaina quietly. Brandy seemed to look right through Kaina for an instant. Then her eyes focused, and she saw Kaina quite clearly. Her eyes grew large with recognition, and her mouth drooled toothpaste helplessly down onto the quilt in a slick stream of saliva. Brandy's head whipped around to the basin, where she spat a long stream of toothpaste towards the center of the bowl, hitting it with a practiced ease. She spun back around towards Kaina again, wiping her mouth on the back of her hand. Brandy was breathing open-mouthed now, like she might be frightened. Her chest rose and fell in shallow pants. "You!" whispered Brandy harshly. Kaina tried to smile. "You're real!" Kaina felt very odd at that moment. She had never had her existence doubted before, and her eyebrows shot up in reply. Of course Kaina was real. It was Brandy's reaction that was so unreal, and this frightened Kaina. Kaina had to remember that this was an actress, and that she had to perform any given role, even this one. But Kaina had been stunned by this reaction none the less. "I am," swallowed Kaina uneasily, "quite real." Brandy nodded and stepped forward to touch Kaina, as if she were the resurrected Christ, not yet ascended unto her Father. Kaina was like totally spooked by Brandy's performance, and she sought to gain control. "Stop it, Brandy," she said weakly. Too weakly, in fact, to do any good. "No," said Brandy, shaking her head. "No, you were here last night." "I said I was," said Kaina, harsher than she intended to. The overpowering smell of toothpaste made Kaina wince, and she told Brandy to wash her mouth out. Toothpaste was smearing the girl's face like frothing rabies. "Rinse again," said Kaina, surprised at her own order. She pointed at the glass. Brandy rinsed and spat again, and wiped her mouth once more on that filthy blanket. She stared at Kaina in wonder. Kaina wasn't sure if she was all right yet or not. Brandy did not appear to be stoned now. She had accepted Kayana's presence as fact, and that was a start. "What do you want?" asked Brandy, suddenly suspicious. "That depends," said Kayana. "Depends on what?" "On what you want." "What I want," said Brandy, walking towards the barred window. "What I want doesn't matter." She peered out through the bars, and she winced at the bright light that lay just beneath the eaves of the roof. She was beginning to remember her conversation with Kayana now, and she nodded her head. That snow did look awfully deep outside. "Man, you came through that?" asked Brandy. "No, I got here before all that," answered Kayana. "You remember last night, don't you, Brandy?" spat Brandy in derision. "I don't know if that was a dream or real, what I recall of it." "We talked," said Kayana, moving closer to her, easing the distance between them. "You remember us talking, don't you?" "If I dreamed about someone like you," said Brandy, chewing her tongue, "and I see you here today, no, I wouldn't know if you were here last night or not, would I?" Kayana shook her head to clear it. "You're confusing me, Brandy. Don't do that." "Now," said Brandy, smiling that actress smile of hers, "you have some idea of what I'm going through." Brandy turned back to look out the window again, and then she walked past Kayana, back over to her dog Go Potty. For a moment Kayana thought she was going to sit down again and use it, but she didn't. Instead she raised the upper half of what should have been a full lid, splitting the dog Go Potty in half, and she began to shovel out the used litter with a small sand pail. She was shoveling the contents out into a small green trash bag, and now Kayana noticed that the whole corner of the room was lined with these half-filled trash bags from previous uses. Brandy's wastes had accumulated over the last several days, and he had not been by to clear them away for her. The smell wasn't so bad once she got used to it, but it was still thick and cloying. The scent of pine and waste was nauseating when taken together. "You see," said Brandy, emptying her commode, "all the days blur together in this place, and when he dopes me up, well, then I am even more confused. I remember you now. You said my door was open last night, and that I could go out if I wanted to." She looked at Kayana seriously. "You did say that, didn't you, last night?" "Yes, Brandy, I did say that." Brandy looked at the door and nodded slowly. The door was open now, but she made no effort to rush for it. She looked at it wisely, and she sighed deeply, with a great noise. "And so I'm free, am I? I'm really free?" She looked back at Kayana again. Kayana nodded, uncertain as to where this line of questioning was leading. "And I guess we can just leave now, I suppose he's not going to stop us." Kayana understood. "He's not here, Brandy." "Obviously," she spat back. "And so where is he, huh?" "I don't follow you," said Kayana, dryly. "You're not the first woman who has offered to rescue me, but they were all hallucinations. You follow that, don't you?" "Why are you asking me this, Brandy?" "Only I want to know one thing. What you've done with him, is all. I look outside and I see a blizzard. I look back in here and I see you. I don't see him. He might be testing me. He might be trying to see if I'll leave him." "He's not here, Brandy," repeated Kayana. Brandy did not seem convinced. "Unless you have killed me and can show me his body," said Brandy, "then he is here. Unless you can show me his corpse, he's always here." "No, he's not," said Kayana, her voice rising, "and unless you snap out of it, he's going to come back and find us arguing about it." "See," said Brandy, "he's always here." Kayana spun around and left the room. Brandy waited, and a moment later she saw Kayana coming through the door, laden down with the cooling tray of breakfast. She managed a smile for Brandy as she looked for a place to set it down. She saw over by the fireplace a small card table like children use, and she placed the tray upon its cardboard surface. It was surprisingly firm for such a table. A chair, designed for a child, was nearby. Kayana saw that the chair had no arms, and that Brandy could sit in it and eat comfortably. She went around and pulled the chair back, inviting Brandy to come and sit down at her table. Brandy stared at her. "I've already eaten," said Brandy, indifferently. "No, you haven't," said Kayana, looking over at the open cans of beans and potted meat that Brandy had obviously called breakfast that morning. "No, you haven't begun to eat, Brandy. You need breakfast, girl. Come and eat. Sit." If Brandy had not been so famished for bacon and eggs, and if she hadn't been so tempted with that wonderful smell, she might have argued with Kayana. But the food did look good, and surprisingly hot. Brandy capitulated. She walked over and sat down at Kayana's table, while Kayana unfolded the napkins and set her up properly. There was a hint of gratitude in Brandy's eyes, but not much else could be seen past all that obvious hunger. A confusion was on Brandy's face that Kayana could tell. The confusion was one of whether or not Kayana was involved with the captor. Brandy had been watching the doorway of her room ever since Kayana had gotten her attention, to see if he would come smilingly through the doorway or not. Brandy liked the large, huskily built blonde woman. She decided this as she tasted the terrific breakfast. This woman was a much better cook than Brandy was, she knew right away. She was also a much better cook than the captor. He always burned everything. "Mmm," said Brandy, unable to help it. The pleasure in her features leaked out from behind a crumpled smile. Kayana beamed in obvious pleasure. "Good?" asked Kayana hopefully. "Terrific," said Brandy, tasting everything. The coffee was good and hot and fresh. It hadn't been left in the damn pot all morning until he could decide to get off his dead lazy ass and bring it up here to her. This breakfast, Brandy knew, had not been grudgingly prepared at all. This breakfast had been done right. "I want to thank you," said Brandy, "for this breakfast. It's terrific." Kayana waited, trying not to add anything. "But I want you to know that I cannot escape from him, and I don't intend to try." This established, Brandy looked impishly up at Kayana and licked her greasy fingers, smiling as though she had just gotten her way with something. "I'm not high on anything now," said Brandy, "and I'm thinking clearly. Last night you might have gotten me to go through that door. Not today. Today I'm smart enough not to try that. That would be stupid." "Why would that be stupid, Brandy?" asked Kayana wearily. "Cause and effect," said Brandy. "I escape and he has to retrain me all over again. That means the stick." "What stick?" asked Kayana. "The one he uses on my ass when I disobey him, when I'm bad." "He hits you with a stick?" asked Kayana, horrified. Said Brandy, licking more of the bacon grease off her hands. "Yeah, he used to, but not for a long time now. You see, we got this understanding between us. We don't have to use the stick on me any more. I'm trained, you see I am." Kayana felt the weight of her situation closing down upon her. "But I'm good, see, so he don't hit me no more. Unless you make me misbehave or something, and then he'll have to get the stick out again, and I don't want that." "You think that he's trained you?" asked Kayana. "Sure, he has. And don't tell him he really hasn't either. You don't upset him. I've had lots of practice not upsetting a man who has power over me. I had this director one time." She looked at Kayana to see if she was still listening. She was listening, very intently. Brandy continued. "This director, right, he was a real bastard. He would slap me right on the set in front of the others. My mom made me take it 'cause she wanted me to keep the part. I wanted to kill his ass, but I didn't dare even snarl at him. He was over me, and I had to do what he said, or else." Kayana suddenly realized that Brandy's career was not her own, that she had been an innocent bystander, perhaps, all the time. "Did your mom make you do that?" asked Kayana, pointing up to the porno poster on the wall. Brandy smiled. "No, that was later. I did that for money." Kayana nodded. "You mean that you were making teenage rebellion movies, and all the time they were mistreating you on the set?" "That's pretty much it," she said. "Why didn't you just run away?" asked Kayana. "Oh man, these men were mob, or something. They'd have killed me." "No," said Kayana. "Really?" "You remember Tommy Timms, the little redhead that used to do those awful slasher flicks?" Tommy Timms had been found dead of a drug overdose in her pool. She had been making a movie at the time and had been throwing a party, the papers had said. Accidental drowning by narcotic overdose, the coroner had ruled. "I remember her," said Kayana. "What about her?" "I knew Tommy," said Brandy. "She was a few years older than me, and she was wanting out of the business. She had her wealth all squirreled away, and she wanted to have a family, raise some kids, live a decent life." Brandy looked at Kayana, and she knew she had her undivided attention. "She had sold some dope for Big Boy, and once you sell for him, you are his. He sealed her fate, and some of his men took her out with an injection of the pure stuff. Tommy didn't even use. She was clean." Kayana gasped. "Dumped her pretty little ass in her own pool after the party," finished Brandy, wiping her mouth on the napkin Kayana had given her. "And you have sold dope for this Big Boy?" asked Kayana. "No, but I modeled for him." She nodded at the poster. "And besides, once a girl gets a name like I had in the business, man, I'll always be somebody's piece of ass. The days of the really big stars are over. No more Helen Hayes, no Greta Garbo. Now even Glenn Close owes somebody somewhere. You just don't walk in and say yes to a starring role. It says yes to you. And then, Kayana, it owns you." "No," said Brandy. "They never let them forget that you owe them." Kayana was speechless. "Take my tray," whispered Brandy, shoving it gently towards her. "If he sees it here, he'll whip on me with his stick for sure." Kayana couldn't help feeling like a waitress in a movie studio commissary the way Brandy had just asked her to remove her tray. This angered Kayana. She had the feeling like the captor himself had all of Brandy's respect, and Kayana, so far, had earned none of her own. This must change, thought Kayana. "I don't believe," she said, shoving the tray back towards Brandy, "I don't believe that I made myself very clear to you." Brandy looked at her in surprise. "Let me explain it for you again, just so you know. My name is Kayana Erbachem. I was lost in a snowstorm on my way out here to visit my mother. I am here, and there is no one here now but you and me. Now, you say that there is a man holding you hostage. Maybe he was in this house, but he's not here any longer, Brandy. Since you have no control over your own life any more, I shall have to help you." Brandy said nothing. "First of all, I'm the only person here who is emotionally capable of making decisions for you. Fortunately for you, Brandy, I am here. I don't think he's coming back at all myself." "He'll be back," said Brandy. "Maybe, maybe not. At any rate, until he does come back, it is my duty to be your friend. I will do that for you, but you're going to have to help me." Brandy wasn't sure. Her sideways glance told Kayana this much. "You cannot help me, Kayana. You don't know this man." "You don't know me either," smiled Kayana. "You'll see," whispered Brandy. "You'll see." "I want to know something," said Kayana. "I want to know why you have resisted each and every attempt I have made to help you get a grip on this." "Welcome to hell, Kayana." "Welcome to hell. What is it you want to know? Why you're being such a bitch? Tell me that much." "Why am I a bitch?" screamed Brandy. She threw her coffee cup across the room where it shattered against the far wall. "Why am I a bitch? Let me show you, Kayana. He beats me with a switch. I eat out of cans and I crap in a dog box. I am a dog. See that I am? But I can live with that. In fact, the only thing I'm having any trouble with at all is this little airhead blonde I know." Brandy was staring at Kayana. "You have a lot to learn, little Miss Innocence. You have wandered into an awful place. I don't know how to tell you that, Kayana, but it's not just a matter of walking out of here and leaving. For one thing," she pointed out the window, "there is 10 feet of snow outside. You gonna open up your trusty old umbrella and fly us out of here? Just because he ain't here right now doesn't mean he doesn't live here any more. This is his house, Kayana, and I think he can find his way back. I am living on the edge of sanity, and you have the gall to ask me what is wrong." She stared at Kayana, hate burning across her pretty face. Kayana chewed her tongue and bit her lips together tightly, saying nothing. "Well?" asked Brandy. Finally Kayana spoke. "What we have here is failure to communicate." Brandy watched her closely. Kayana seemed to swell a full size larger in her rage. Kayana walked up to Brandy and pushed her back down in her seat. Brandy went down as easily as a feather. Kayana reached out and grabbed Brandy by her hair, over each of her ears. Brandy winced and Kayana pulled her hard across the table, the grease in Brandy's hair threatening to free her from Kayana's hold. "I," said Kayana, "am not going to put up with this." Brandy was wincing fiercely and hissing through her teeth. Kayana pulled at her hair harder. "Now I see you are afraid of him. That is understandable. That's cool. But I do not plan to live here with you, Brandy, in this captivity." Brandy's eyes widened. "You see, Brandy," said Kayana, "you are endangering my life as well as your own." Brandy, weak from her captivity, was no match for the well-fed Kayana. Kayana pulled Brandy's small nose right up against her own with a sudden yank of Brandy's head and hair. Brandy gasped a little, but still said nothing. "Now do I have your attention, Bam Bam?" asked Kayana. "Yes, ma'am," whispered Brandy hoarsely. "Well, that's good. Now how do you feel about this, Brandy?" Brandy's eyebrows knitted together. Kayana was asking her how she felt about it. That was a switch. Most of her overbearing captors just told her what to do. Kayana was actually asking her how she felt. Brandy could see Kayana was not like her other tormentors. "I want to live," whispered Brandy. Kayana relinquished her hold on the girl's hair. "Then act like it, you little snot." Brandy started to weep, the stinging in her temples throbbing from where her hair had been pulled. She rubbed the sides of her head with her fingertips lightly. "You call this living?" asked Kayana, gesturing to the room around her. Brandy choked down a sob. The truth was hurting her. Kayana had surprised herself. An hour ago she had been afraid of this woman. Now she was ready to put her across her knee and spank her bare bottom. Kayana was doing the only thing she knew to get Brandy's attention. She was forcing her. "I've never been a captive," said Kayana, "but I have an idea that it gets so easy to just give up, to just give into it, like a disease. That's what captors all want, isn't it? To break your spirit. Isn't that right, Brandy?" Brandy nodded, wiping her eyes and biting her lower lip. "Well," said Kayana, softening, like Kelly used to do after she had just whipped her, "we won't have that between us, then, will we?" Brandy shook her head no. Kaina brushed Brandy's hair back lovingly out of her eyes. Submission of the child was the thing all mothers wanted. Kaina was seeing that now for the first time. Like Kelly used to do with her after punishment. Now Kaina felt compelled to give this strange woman the same thing. Kaina felt compelled to comfort the repentant girl, as though Brandy was her own daughter or something. Kaina smiled at her and thought of little Echo for a moment. Oh, little Echo would be so proud of this new take charge Kaina. Echo would be so very proud of this adult-like change in her immature friend. Kaina felt warm for a moment. Echo! Of course! Echo would never forgive Kaina if she didn't get Brandy's autograph. It was a strange thought, and a strange time to have such a thought, but it was what Kaina was thinking at that moment. As she stroked Brandy's hair, massaging her fingertips together in Brandy's greasy head, she thought for a moment. It was almost as if it had been predestined. Kaina saw a large can't-roll crayon lying in the floor over by the barred windows, just the same time as she remembered the torn wallpaper she had seen, subconsciously, on her way into the room. Kaina had not seen a can't-roll crayon for years. They were these enormous first-grader crayons. Her teacher, Miss Hopkins, used to call them crowns instead of crayons. They were designed for awkward little unskilled fingers to use. They were flat on one side, as though the cylindrical shape had been shaved off not quite halfway through the center, lengthwise. This meant that the crayon could not roll off of a desk and go all over the room. Can't roll was a good name for them. As Kaina got up to cross over and pick up the crayon, she saw why the old crayon was up here in Brandy's room to begin with. All around the rebarred windows there were these reddish hash marks. The captor had used the crayon to mark his carpentry when he had designed this captive room. He was a sloppy man, was this captor. "This yours?" asked Kaina as she knelt to pick the crayon up. It was bright red, and the point of it had been sharpened with a knife, and then dulled on one side with use. The paper was faded and old. "No," said Brandy, watching her, as if that was the first time she herself had seen the crayon there. Kaina went over to the torn section of the wallpaper, and she tore off a big piece of it. She heard Brandy gasp audibly, but she didn't look at her. She just continued tearing off the wallpaper until she had a great piece that roughly resembled the drawing of the Ponderosa on Bonanza. She took this down, and with crayon in hand, she turned to Brandy, smiling. Kaina walked over to Brandy, and she placed the piece of wallpaper on the table in front of her. She laid the crayon down beside it. The underside of the old wallpaper was face up, with old dry streaks of yellow glue and age marring the original white backing of the paper. Brandy suddenly realized what Kaina was after here, and she slowly began to shake her head back and forth. No. "Why not?" asked Kaina quietly. Brandy did not have an audible answer for Kaina, but she didn't want to do this. It seemed to offend Brandy, unnatural after so long a time away from the stage. Brandy herself no longer thought she was an actress any more, but a captive. She felt a queer revulsion run through her upon Kaina's requesting the autograph. It nauseated her. "Sign it," said Kaina, and her voice wasn't asking her to do it at all. It was telling her. Brandy looked at her as if her eyes might plead no for her without them making Kaina mad at her. Kaina touched the edge of the paper and stared hard at Brandy. Her harsh Scorpio stare tore right through Brandy like hot surgical lasers. "You know," said Kaina, rubbing her lower lip impatiently, "you know, I have seen the way people in your life have gotten your attention, Brandy." Brandy didn't breathe for a moment. "And I know how it's done." Kaina wasn't looking very much like Kaina at this moment. Her eyes had what Kaina had noticed in Brandy as that 1,000-yard stare. Only Kaina's stare was from intense concentration. "And," said Kaina, "I can do it too." "You can?" asked Brandy, swallowing hard. Kaina nodded, not even looking at her now. "Yes," said Kaina, shifting that powerful stare right back into Brandy's face. "Yes, I can." Brandy swallowed again and looked down at the paper. "Brandy, I'm going to get you out of here," said Kaina, "and back up on that stage again where you belong." She looked right at her. "If I have to beat it out of you." "If I have to beat you to do it." "You're just like them," spat Brandy. "You hate me too." Kaina smiled a little bit. "Well, Pumpkin," she said, imitating her mother beautifully, "I can't argue with success now, can I?" Brandy whined. Kaina smiled in silence. Then she said, "Right." Kaina wasn't playing with her any more. Her voice was serious enough to make Brandy pick up the crayon in her left hand. Southpaw, thought Kaina. She was discovering that she loved getting her way almost as much as Kelly did. "Why are you making me do this?" whispered Brandy, tears evident in her low voice. "Echo loves you," explained Kaina, "and until you start thinking of others, there's no way you can ever help yourself. Is there? Put, to Echo Bradley, love always, Brandy Ann Manson." "Do it now." Brandy quivered above the paper. "Now, please," said Kaina. Brandy sobbed in the back of her throat like she had swallowed something the wrong way. She had her own tears. "Oh, better put my biggest fan in there too, Brandy," said Kaina, getting off the edge of the small, incredibly sturdy table, and meandering over to the window to pretend to look out at the scenery. "I can't," said Brandy. It's not right. I'm not the person I was any more. I have nothing now to be proud of." "Yes, you do," said Kaina, peering through the bars. "You have Echo, and she loves you very, very much." Kaina glanced back expectantly at Brandy. "And I love Echo." "Now, please," said Kaina again. Kaina looked out the window and sighed loudly when Brandy didn't write. "Do we need a demonstration, Brandy Manson?" asked Kaina matter-of-factly. Brandy trembled. Kaina was serious, and whatever she intended to do to her, she was going to do it soon if Brandy didn't comply. Hell with it, thought Brandy. I have no self-respect any more. Might as well sign it. Brandy placed the crayon against the paper, and she began to write. Kaina glanced back over her shoulder, and her heart leapt with joy within her as she saw the starlet put her autograph on the paper. It had worked. Kaina had yet another merit badge to show for this rural adventure. As Brandy signed the paper, Kaina could once again envision her back up on the stage or the screen again, as before, self-assured and popular as ever. Kaina beamed to herself, but she could not hide her smile. She crossed over to Brandy quietly. "Beautiful," said Kaina, picking up the finished artwork. "You write very nicely, Brandy, even in crayon." Kaina leaned over and very gently kissed Brandy on her forehead. Brandy smiled as Kaina pulled away. "Thank you," said Brandy, blushing in shame just a little bit. "You deserved that," said Kaina, "and Echo thanks you in advance. She will freak out over this." "Now," said Kaina cheerily, with a renewed sense of purpose. She folded the autograph up very carefully and placed it in the robe of her pocket. "Now, since we have given up our fears and have not given up our acting, our next task is to get you cleaned up. Come." Kaina held out her hand bravely to the cowering young woman.
"Come," repeated Caiina. "We must keep ourselves looking good, Brandy. I am afraid I'm not much of a make-up man, but I will have to suffice. Anything's better than the way you look right now. Up." Brandy stood up and took her hand slowly. Caiina closed hers around Brandy's trembling fingers gently, but firmly. Without another word, Caiina led Brandy out of the room and down the stairs. Caiina didn't even acknowledge the slight bit of resistance Brandy offered her as they passed over the threshold of the doorway, out into the upstairs sitting room. The fire in the stove was blazing comfortably away. Caiina also did not notice that, as they crossed over the threshold of the doorway, Brandy had her eyes closed. No, all that Caiina could realize at that moment was the indescribable joy in her heart. Chapter 12. "Kelly," asked Don. Kelly woke up, but she did not open her eyes. "Kelly, you going to lay there all day?" She did not answer him. She could not answer him. Tears were in her voice. She knew that if she answered him, her voice would catch in her throat and crack. She did not want him to know that she had been crying in her sleep. She feigned sleep now instead, hoping that he would just go away. It was the morning of the 5th day without Caiina. Don wasn't exactly sure how Kelly would be this morning. He really just wanted to let her sleep. Sleep was the best thing for her right now, since she could do nothing about Caiina's situation. He wanted to do that, just let her sleep, but he couldn't. She had been taking those damn tranquilizers of his, and he was afraid that fluid would collect in her lungs if she didn't stand up once in a while. He knew that was how bedridden people got pneumonia. He considered the small vial of tranquilizers on the bedside table. They were very old. He had once taken them himself, years ago, when he had come out of boot camp. A doctor had prescribed them for nerves. That was back when doctors would prescribe drugs for any silly little thing like nerves. He had taken several of them, but he had never thrown the bottle away. He did not like being zonked out of his mind, he had decided, so he hadn't taken but just a few of them. Kelly here was different. She loved dope. She would make a terrific junkie. She ate Alka-Seltzers by the bottleful and loved anything with paregoric in it. Damn little junkie. These pills might be hurting her, and she would never even know it. Don snatched up the bottle of pills and walked over to the window. He raised the pane of glass and opened the screen, which was on its own frame. He raised this out of the way and latched it. The cold wind blew into the room, causing Kelly to shiver beneath her quilts. Don drew his arm back, and he hummed the offending bottle of tranquilizers out across the snow-covered blur of the white landscape. "There," he said. "Now if she finds those, she can have them all, every damn one of them." Kelly heard him say that. Still, she did not move. Don unlatched the screen, allowing it to clack noisily back into place, a noise loud enough to wake Kelly. He then slammed the window down and shivered himself. Although the sun was out, it was cold as hell out there. Kelly still hadn't moved at all, and this pissed him off. The drug in Kelly's system was magnifying everything Don was doing. She heard the screen slam again and again as it echoed in the empty chambers of her head. An empty cathedral didn't echo this badly. Her head seemed to be 500 feet from floor to ceiling, and wide enough for a full mass to gather and chant thunderously within. They were now chanting thunderously within, and so the ringing in her ears was like unto the bells of St. Mary's, bangling and bongling insanely in her mind. Don was chanting thunderously in this crowd. "Are you going to be in bed all day?" The dope which had kept her humanly asleep for 3 days had just been thrown out the window. Wonderful man was Donald Blue. He would always take whatever little bit of pleasure she had in the world, whether it be a little bit of dope or her only begotten daughter. Any pleasure she had, he was sure to take it away from her. As Kelly had slept, it had come to her that Don was the reason Kelly was separated from Caiina now, and maybe forever. Don had done it. He had appealed to her womanly lusts, and he had slain her little girl. Kelly had given into the womanly temptation, and was now paying the price. Kelly was terrified she would never see Kaina again. But Kelly had been having the dreams. Her dreams were the déjà vu kind, and she was certain of this. Some of her dreams were stupid, and some could make her orgasm in her sleep. But a few of them were these déjà vu dreams. In the last few day-nights of sleep, under drug-induced narcosis, she had had several of these dreams. They had all had that déjà vu feel to them. They were fortune-telling dreams. The first one was that Kaina was with her again, and they were back in the apartment in Ohio. They were making coffee and hugging each other. The scene was beautiful, and it was summertime outside. Kaina had hugged her mother close, and Kelly had felt Kaina's large boobs press comfortably into her back. "Mama," Kaina had whispered, "I'm all right. Really, I am." "Are you sure?" Kelly had asked her in the dream. "Yes, Mama," said Kaina, and then she had kissed her. That was the first dream. The others were similar, and each one had told her a little bit more about Kelly's and Kaina's real-life situation, or so Kelly had believed. The second of these dreams had Kaina buying an old farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere. She was apparently very happy with this purchase, so in the dream Kelly had approved of her buying the place. That was the second dream, and it had made very little sense. Very little sense, except to follow the general scheme of the third dream. Now, in the third dream, Kaina had had a daughter, herself. But the daughter in the dream was fully grown, and Kelly remembered asking her where this woman had been while she was growing up. Kelly had never seen her granddaughter before. "I told you, Mama," Kelly heard from her daughter in the dream. "I adopted her." "But," Kelly said, "she's a grown woman, Kaina. Why did you adopt a fully grown woman?" "Because she needed love, Mama. You love me, and I'm fully grown." "Yes, but Kaina, honey, I raised you." "Just because a daughter grows into a woman doesn't mean you just let her go, Mama," Kaina had told her sternly. And then had come the guilt. Lord, yes, the guilt, and what guilt there had been. Her daughter had adopted a fully grown woman in her dream, simply because Kelly had abandoned Kaina for Donald Blue. Abandoned at the age of 18, but abandoned nonetheless. No tranquilizers did not eradicate guilt, Kelly now knew. They made it thousands of times worse. They were still snowbound. Kelly knew this without getting up. If Don had been able to get out of the house this morning, he would have done so. He was out of cigarettes, beer, and patience, and not in that order. Kelly wished a path could be cut just to get him out of her hair for a while, just so she could get up and wash it without being asked 14 questions about how she felt and how she was taking it, and shit questions like that. Sure, he was her husband and all, but he wasn't Kaina's father. That meant there was a private bond between Kelly and Kaina where he could not enter, ever. He was the outsider in that relationship, which explained perfectly to Kelly why he hadn't wanted her to come out here in the first place. But he was only thinking of himself, and no longer was he thinking of her happiness at seeing Kaina again. Well, now he could have Kelly all to himself. He had managed to get Kaina lost and in all probability killed. She thought he had left the room and flinched involuntarily when he sat down on the bed beside her. What did he want now? She wondered until he patted her on the ass, his fingers lingering near her sensitive gluteal ridge. They trembled. Oh, no. He would never ask for it. It would not be proper to ask a grieving mother for a roll in the sheets. Besides, how sexy could she look after a week laying here in the sack? She couldn't believe he was asking her for that now. She ground her teeth and did not open her eyes. He would not ask her for it. but he would suggest it to her through these movements. "That all you ever think about?" she asked gruffly, her sleepy voice angry. He pulled his hand back like it had been burned, like her ass had been a red-hot electrical stove, and he had caught his fingers between the rings. "I didn't mean," he weakly began, but she romped over on her back and kicked off the sheets, revealing her sweat-soaked body underneath. She was sweating, and she was a little bit sour-smelling. He swallowed hard and looked at the woman lying before him. Firm boobs and well-marbled navel. Hot and a little bit musky. Yeah, he wanted her badly. "I didn't want—" he started again. "You didn't want it?" asked Kelly. "I find that damned hard to believe, Don. It's been a week, buddy, and they're blue, aren't they?" "Yes, ma'am," he managed weakly. Kelly sighed and opened herself up for him. He saw that she didn't intend to watch nor even participate. That would not be a problem for him. It never was. Wives were supposed to submit themselves, and here was Kelly, submitting. He was swallowing hard and leaning over her like a famished vampire. She wanted him to do it to her. She wanted it, but not for the reasons he would think, not to relieve her of some tension and grief. Kelly wanted him for punishment. Kelly was after pain this morning, and as he got into bed with her, she was preparing herself to take it, like a whipping. She would take it, suffer, and then go back to sleep. She was grateful that men climaxed in seconds, and had no conception of the thing called multiple orgasm. Thank God. Thank God for that. He knew what he was doing when he made men with hair triggers. She looked at the clock, and it said 12 noon. By 6 after, he would be through. He would grunt and roll away, completely satisfied. She tried to wait for this time as patiently as she could. It would not be easy, she thought, but she was wrong. He joined with her, and the bright sharpness of her opening with his arrival brought her this unexplainable sense of need. She hissed, and the hiss was one of pleasure. Tears of relief streamed down her face, for, damn it all, if he wasn't actually making her feel better just by putting it inside of her. It did cut into that block of tension which was her body, and it did seem to help. She groaned demonically in his ear, making him flinch a little. His thrusts frenzied against her, and she threw back her head and screamed loudly with each bouncing whump. Her screams sounded painful, but she was in no pain at all. She was releasing the beast within herself, and it was good to do that. Her body closed around his, and her fingernails ripped into his mighty back muscles with each hammering blow. A sudden shudder within her caused her to scream again, a tearing sensation this time, and she recognized it as a spasm within her womb. She had not had a feeling like that in a long time. Normally her climax was a thing to be worked for, sweated after, and finally gained. This was like falling off a high ledge, effortless and blank for a few seconds, until she hit. She had not had one of these since she was 13 years old, by herself, in the bathroom. During these last few glorious seconds, Kelly Erbican Blue looked up at Don, and it wasn't Don she saw at all. It was the face of a man she smiled into, the face of a male creation, and she gloried in it for just a second. For just a second, Kelly understood God and the divine mission of the procreating beast, how it should be fruitful and multiply, and how all of this had anything at all to do with glory. It was so beautiful that she cried. Then it was over. With tears on her face, she smiled at Don. Don looked at her wide-eyed and ashamed. He scurried off her and left the room, feeling like he had opened wide Pandora and her box, and had released something old and powerfully terrible into the air. He had released the power of Kelly's womanhood, and it was very strong indeed. Kelly laughed sweetly, without hatred for his weakness. He was a simple man, and he did not understand. All he wanted was to come, an orgasm. But he had completed her as man is designed to. She luxuriously rolled on the sheets and stretched herself. For a few brief moments she had not thought about Caiina at all. Now she knew that Caiina would be fine. Caiina had within herself this same woman thing, and it would protect her from all the men in the world. It would make her a woman whether Caiina wanted it to or not. Kelly sat up now, and as deliberately as Isis Cleopatra she stood up and saw in the mirror just how beautifully sexy she was, just how beautiful sex had made her. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright jewels under water. Her flesh tingled and her muscles glowed with life. She went into the bathroom and drew herself a hot bath. Caiina stood by the shower as Brandy stepped into the stinging heat of the steam. There was a moment of uncertainty on her face, and then she dissolved into the mist. As she disappeared behind the plastic curtain, Caiina heard her moan in helpless surrender. Caiina smiled to herself. "Oh," said Brandy, muffled by the choking fog. "Oh?" asked Caiina, staring up at the ceiling. "This feels," said Brandy. "Good?" asked Caiina, almost yelling over the roar of the water. Brandy had turned the water up some now, and it was spitting out the edges of the curtain as the great drape flapped gently back and forth. Repeated Brandy, by way of reply. The weeks of grime and dirt were pouring off her, and Caiina felt herself tingle as she fantasized what it would be like to have a shower after so long without one. One little menstruation, and Caiina was ready to be deemed unclean until she had bathed. This poor child had not had a good bath in months, maybe. Caiina swallowed and smiled bitterly. Brandy poked her head out of the curtain and smiled at Caiina. "Soap?" she asked sweetly. There was a different woman in there already. Caiina handed her a bar of Zest and a bottle of Revlon shampoo. Brandy took them gently and whipped back behind the curtain again. In a few moments Caiina was smelling that spicy smell she loved so much, and watching as Brandy writhed behind the curtain. Caiina decided that she ought not hurry Brandy, and she handed the bottle of conditioner to her behind the curtain, without seeing. She felt the water sting her arm, and she felt the bottle poke Brandy in her side. Brandy giggled, and a soapy hand grabbed at Caiina's arm like a wet eel. "Here you go," said Caiina. "I'll be outside, so stay as long as you like." Brandy said nothing, but she was making these really pleasurable noises in there, and they made Caiina's eyebrows shoot up. Brandy seemed to be dancing under the stream of water. Caiina saw her silhouette as it swayed back and forth. Of course, thought Caiina, she is a dancer. That's her way. Caiina left the bathroom and stepped out into the cooler living room. The fire she had built was as hot as it could get. Still, but it was a good deal cooler out here than in there. Caiina began to think what Brandy would have to wear when she came out. That was if Brandy decided to come out at all. As Caiina checked her clothing to see if they were dry enough to wear, she had to wonder if she wasn't a little bit jealous of Brandy. When Brandy got all cleaned up and smelling good, she would be as beautiful as ever. Caiina, while she saw herself as pretty, knew she was no match for Bam Bam Manson. Few women were, in fact, as pretty as that dark little creature. As Caiina listened to the water running in the other room, she heard singing. This sweet, high voice was rising out of the shower, a voice that had been trained to carry a tune, and could carry it effortlessly. Brandy was singing. It was beautiful to hear. Caiina started taking off her robe now, and she slipped off the old Reeboks in favor of her now dry leather sneakers.